Welcome to Vocation Mode, episode 2 with Megan and Troy. This week's episode is a brutally kind look at hiring, feedback, and most importantly, blind spots. Love you, but you might be the problem.
So to kick it off, Troy, did you want to talk a little bit about organizational blind spots and what's sort of going on with some of our nonprofit friends?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And this whole blind spot thing has really come to the forefront for me as I wrote a quick kind of LinkedIn post about the fact that I am teaching my third child to drive. And as I get older, I think perhaps I know I'm getting closer to the end of life and I'm thinking a bit more about my mortality. And it is absolutely terrifying this time, particularly the whole merging thing. Like, oh my word, don't even get me started. It just got me thinking about blind spots, which is why we're kind of talking about this today, because I think blind spots are a lot like in our lives, they're a lot like driving. Just knowing your car has a blind spot, as I've learned 3 times with my children, doesn't make it safe. You can talk about there's one there, it doesn't make it safe. You have to learn how to check it, how to compensate for it, how to navigate it, how to trust your mirrors, right? Trust that it's there and then learn to work your way around it. And so today I'm kind of excited to kind of dig in and, like you say, talk a little bit about the different ways and different spaces we might be experiencing blind spots, either as an org or as a candidate. And we'll try to kind of get to the bottom of it and see if we can help people merge more safely into that next chapter of their career. So, but yeah, organizational blind spots. There's, I think, lots of them that we could talk about, but particularly in the hiring process. One of them, I think, is maybe you've heard this phrase before. We'll know the right fit when we see it, and it's kind of like, well, tell me more about that, because I think lots of times there's this overconfidence in people's kind of gut instinct, like those antennae that like will just know, like when you know, you know. And what ends up happening there, unfortunately, is that often reinforces confirmation bias, which is actually really hard to remove. It's a blind spot that not a lot of people see, but even when you start to understand confirmation bias, it's really hard to remove it from the process. So it's like one thing to know that it's there, which lots of people don't think about it. They don't know the blind spot's there, but then you discover there's a kind of a group think that starts to happen in the interview process. And we all start to kind of nod and be like, oh yeah, this is it. I feel it. So it's really hard to remove that. I watched a podcast a few weeks ago, Diary of a CEO, where he talked a bit about the way that they try to remove confirmation bias from their hiring process. And I thought it was fascinating. The way that they've designed their hiring process to kind of isolate people from each other as they're actually doing interviews. And so everyone gets a list of 10 questions about kind of the competency for the role, and then 10 questions about culture for the role. And then individuals on their team meet one-on-one with the person that they're looking to hire, and they have conversations with them and they walk through those questions. And then they have to rate the person at the end about not likely to hire, likely to hire, very likely to hire. They have to actually rate the person, and then all that gets turned in without any of them having conversations or seeing what the other person has done. And then they come together at the table and all of that gets kind of laid out. And they get to see like who rated the individual where, and then they have real robust conversations where they kind of like fight for their rating and why they believe that it's true. And I know very few organizations would do that. Even just saying it out loud, lots of organizations be like, who has the horsepower to do that? But in the podcast, they talked about like how important hiring is and how it needs to be seen as like the primary role of leaders, particularly in this new world that we're moving into in the next couple of years. I think whether you choose to go in that direction or whether you just recognize, look, confirmation bias is real, we actually need to address that and figure out ways in our interview process that we can actually try to remove as much of that as possible, whether that's doing a couple of different interviews with different people. Perhaps in the screening process, you can bring in some further conversations and questions that kind of help offset that prior to actually having the person in the room. But I do think lots of organizations feel like, no, we know exactly what we need. We know exactly, we'll know it. If they fit the vibe and the feel, they're right. And then lots of times you just end up hiring someone who looks a lot like you, which may not be exactly what the organization needs in order to move forward. So
yeah, I like a couple of the things that you said there. One is like there's these unspoken sort of subconscious things that might be informing your bias that you might not even be aware of, right? I just had this conversation over commentary, and we were looking at a couple commentators for USA Nationals for the dodgeball tournament. And they brought up these 2 names, and we asked if they were any good, and they're like, you know what, they're British, so they're going to sound good. And the number of times I have interviewed folks with a British accent, and everything they say just sounds so dang intelligent, but you really have to actually pull back, the context of what they're saying, or the content rather, and parse out if there's anything useful there. And the peer pressure, you mentioned that too. If you're in the same room with everyone, you're going to be deferring sort of to the vibe in the room, and you might think someone is completely reasonable, but if everyone else in the room thinks they're unhinged, you might almost get your own insecurity brought into that situation. Or, the other way around.
Oh, yeah.
You
I
might
think,
have a bad vibe, but everyone else seems happy.
and which is why I think one of the ways to kind of at least diminish confirmation bias is to develop trust in a team where there's open, honest communication and robust conversation is encouraged, and where people do feel like they really are allowed to disagree. That
Yep.
that it's that and that you're not going to be in trouble for disagreeing, because you're right, there may be one person in the room who kind of picks up on something that no one else is picking up on, and the pressure that they are under, peer pressure wise, to simply acquiesce to like love them, love them, love them, love them. And for you, there's a big red flag. The amount of fortitude it takes to kind of be the one that's like, I don't know, maybe not. Far too often, you will just kind of cave to the confirmation bias, and you'll just be like, yeah, yeah, great, good, yeah. And what we really want to do in the process, because we just think hiring is so important, is we really want to be able to have those honest, robust conversations. And we want to encourage people to tell the truth, that if there is something that's kind of red flagging, or there's a question, or there's a concern, we really want that to be able to come to the table, and we want to be able to talk about it like really, really clearly.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of radical candor and creating an environment within your organization where you can show that you care about people enough that you are comfortable giving them hard truths, and vice versa, right? You can't necessarily just go off and criticize or even offer feedback and expect it to go well unless you show that you care.
Yeah, I think another organizational blind spot that many organizations tend to struggle with is hiring for harmony and not growth. And it piggybacks on the confirmation bias a little bit. But if everyone thinks like you, if everyone approaches problems like you, if everyone strategizes like you, you're not actually building a team, right? You're kind of building clones of yourself. And what it can end up creating is, rather than like a robust organization where there is great discussion and lots of new ideas and lots of stick work that's being done, you create an echo chamber where it's the same thing gets echoed back again and again and again. And yes, we want to build teams that have great fit, great chemistry, where the culture of how the person actually is in the space meshes well with the people who are there. But I think sometimes we make the mistake of assuming that that means that we all have to be exactly alike. We all have to think exactly alike. We all have to approach things in exactly the same way. And that, I think, is a blind spot that ends up leading to poor hires, but also a lack of productivity. And you think you're hiring for harmony, but you're not, because what ends up happening is everyone feels stagnant. Nothing really gets done. Nothing new really comes to the table. And pretty soon people will start to get bored.
Yeah, it's kind of like hiring for values instead of hiring for personality, right? So you can still find that culture fit in the values and the mission and the goals of individuals, but not necessarily docking marks for being a little bit drier, a little bit more, social, extroverted, introverted than the rest of your team. And I've had the privilege of working at some organizations and some agencies that were really intentional about making sure they were talking to the quietest people in the room and getting them to speak up as well. And they don't always speak for themselves. It's easier sometimes for certain people to just go with the status quo, but they're just keying into so many great opportunities and so many great insights that you might not have otherwise found.
100%. And I think part of the art that is the science of leadership is how do you mine those details, those ideas from the folks who are going to be less likely to be speaking up, and how do you do it in a way that continues to honor them and makes them feel comfortable? I had a team member who I knew was just brilliant. She was much quieter than me, like 99% of the world, and so I really respected her, and I wanted to hear more, because when we'd have one-on-one meetings, the stuff that would come out of our one-on-one meetings and just the incredible process and procedure and strategy and insight. And so I would want her to bring that to the whole table, and particularly because I wanted to validate her. I didn't want it to be like, here I am coming with all this great stuff, that really she's been the one that's kind of been the person who kind of gave rise to all these great ideas. And so I kept trying to kind of push her forward in the meeting, until 2 or 3 weeks later in the next one-on-one, it started with, I need to talk to you because I'm really upset with you. I was like, oh, so radical candor, great, let's chat. What's going on? And that was not the format for her to actually bring that stuff forward in. I was making her feel less and less comfortable, trying to make her feel valued, made her feel devalued and awkward and embarrassed. And so it was really about then trying to figure out, okay, you help me understand how that I can show the value of what you bring. I want you to be able to bring these great ideas to the team in a way that honors how you're wired and how you're going to feel comfortable as well. But she was like yin to my yang, quiet, like really careful process, detailed, strategic, and I was so fortunate to have her on the team. But even as I tried to kind of elevate her and bring her more to the forefront, I had to do it in a way that honored her along the way too.
Sounds like you identified a blind spot in
I
yourself.
thank you. One of about 3,000, I think, but that is very, very true. One of the things that I think is so important too is when you are in the work of crafting a job description, but also really thinking carefully about like what's the ideal person in this role look like, to not just think about, can they do the job or what are the qualifications they need to do this role, but it is to think about like, what do we need on the team? Like what kind of person isn't here? What do we need them to bring to the table, so that you're not just looking to hire for harmony and for likeness, but to actually really think about like, well, who might be an outlier who would bring something really important to the team that we don't have right now. And that's really hard for us to do, because I think sometimes we're concerned about like, well, how will they fit, or how will I lead them? And really, as leaders, it's up to us to get over ourselves and get over our fear and realize, actually, I can't exclude them, and I might actually be damaging the team by excluding this person just because they're quite different from me, and I'm not sure how I'm going to lead them, kind of like the example I just gave of how I embarrassed this person when I was trying to actually lead them forward. But like, it's our job then to be like, well, then I'll need to learn and I'll need to grow as the leader, and not exclude them and not hurt the team. But I need to be willing to be really open to someone who's an outlier who might be quite different, but actually is going to bring exactly what we need in a whole new way. Because that kind of diversity on a team really helps a team grow. And I actually believe it drives the organization forwards.
Yeah, and you touch on something I think we can dig into maybe a little bit more later, but you mentioned taking that feedback and being able to accept criticism. And that is a blind spot a lot of people have as well, right? Like, even if they know they're supposed to ask for it, they're not necessarily in a place where they're ready to receive it, which I've seen completely blow up in people's faces and turn a good, well-intentioned situation into a more hostile one. So yeah, something to touch on later for sure, but you bring up a good point there. I
Yeah.
know another thing that we had talked about, and you sort of looked at finding your perfect fit a second ago. I think on the inverse of that, or the opposite of that, would be trying to find somebody to do everything, or finding your unicorn, if we could bring in that terminology. Just someone that's going to handle every task. I know in nonprofits, it's an ongoing joke. I could walk into any meeting with pretty much any executive director or development officer and say, hey, you wear a lot of hats, don't you? And they would go, yes, I sure do. It just seems to be ubiquitous. It seems to be a rampant problem. So how do we kind of shelter our hires from that? Or do we just manage those expectations that there's always going to be a little bit? Or yeah, what does that sort of look like in your experience, Troy?
Yeah, and I kind of think of it about, like, I love that you called it like the unicorn problem. And by the way, this next thing is for free. But if you are into pub quizzes, I can guarantee that one day you will be at a pub quiz, and one of the bonus questions will be, what is the national animal of Scotland? And the answer
Mm-hmm.
is unicorn. If you don't know this, write it down, because we actually won a few weeks ago, because some guy I was with, when he saw that the bonus question was going to be national animals, he was like, it's unicorn, write it down. And they didn't even say which country it was yet. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, trust me. So we wrote down unicorn, and we won.
What
So
you
there you
win?
go. We won a $50 gift certificate to the pub to come back next week for the next pub
Classic.
quiz. So yeah. Yeah, it's classic. Of course. I mean, it's just generating income, a great business plan. But yeah, I think the unicorn problem, and I think there's two parts to it, like you're saying. I think one is a blind spot on the organizational's part when they're hiring. Particularly, this happens all the time in not-for-profits, right? Like, so we're hiring for this role, and we want a strategic leader, a hands-on manager, someone who's into data and research, who's also incredibly gregarious and relational, and the list kind of goes on, right? What they're looking for is unrealistic. Often they just don't exist, which is why we use that word unicorn, right? They don't exist. Ben, my co-founder, often talks about how, like, lots of times when people are like thinking about who they want to hire for a role, particularly not for profit, they want a 25-year-old with boundless energy, passion, and new ideas with 50 years of experience. Like, the person it just doesn't exist. When you are crafting your job description, and when you are thinking about who is the ideal employee that I'm looking for, I think you have to be really, really careful as you're crafting that out to not fall into that blind spot of like, we are just simply crafting a description that no one is going to be able to satisfy. And therefore we put it out into the world. Recruiters are working on your behalf. They're trying to find someone to kind of fill that role and help your organization move forward, and you're not getting a lot of traction. And sometimes it's just because like you haven't recognized the fact that what you've put out there, no one is going to check all those boxes for. And lots of people who are looking for work are just going to be like, yeah, no. Because if that's what the job description looks like, they're going to make assumptions about your culture and what is going to be asked of them. And lots of people just take a hard pass on that. So I think that's one part of the unicorn problem. But the other part is exactly what you talked about, that it is a reality that not-for-profits don't have as much money as for-profit businesses do. And therefore, people who are working in not-for-profit spaces tend to wear more hats, like often. And so what we have to remember is when we are bringing somebody in and we've hired them for a specific role and we've welcomed them in, we have to be sure that we are as clear as possible about how many hats they will actually be wearing. And we have to be careful that we don't have a stack of hats sitting to the side that we're not talking about right now, that we plan on just slowly kind of putting into their space or putting on their head 2 or 3 months in. Because once again, all you're doing there is you're not being honest. The person is saying yes to one thing, but then their role ends up being another thing. And chances of that person staying with the organization and thriving in the work is slim to none.
Yeah, I want to dig into something you said there because I think it's a great segue into another blind spot, and that is the job descriptions. The importance of using not only like a detailed job description. We don't always know what we're looking for. I get that. Sometimes, you're what's the word I'm looking for? Restructuring. Sometimes you're restructuring your teams, and you're growing into new jobs, new roles. You want sort of that fit to guide where that goes. I totally understand that. But I've seen so many antiquated, outdated job descriptions from 5 years ago. I know I've been on and off a marketing fundraising strategist for many, many years. And I've worked at a couple places that have those job descriptions. And it's always been a running joke that I said to all my clients, like, that job means something completely different from agency to agency. I cannot describe, right? Like I worked somewhere that wanted us to be, really proficient in Excel and data analysts. And ideally, like if you can code in Python or R, that's fantastic. And then you're also supposed to be, like this magician that is creative and comes up with strategy. And then sometimes you're a project manager as well. Worked at other agencies where you have a full team of data analysts, you have project managers. Your whole role now is just to come up with those great ideas, maybe manage a team, check in. And then the amount of client contact can be very different in that role too, right? So you have to be really overt, even though that is a very common job title from place to place, the meaning is completely different. And I run into this quite a few times. So the importance of job descriptions, yes. And one more thing before I jump off my soapbox, post your salary ranges. Friends, I think you have to be showing your salary ranges. You're shooting yourself in the foot. The number of, roles I know I personally haven't applied for because I don't want to go through that process just to find out it's, 40K lower than what I'm after is, numerous. So
100%. I love what you said there. And I think there's two parts to that too. If I can just kind of jump on the whole bad job description piece. There's two parts to that. One is, as an organization, you want to be as clear as possible because that really does outline the work that you're trying to get done, and it helps the individual who is applying to know exactly what they're signing up for. Of course, I mean, there's always give and take there. I get that, other duties as assigned. But for the most part, we can't use that phrase at the end, which I think not-for-profits classically love that phrase because it's like, yeah, and the 8 other things we're not going to talk about as assigned by your director. So let's try to be as clear as we can in the process, but also for candidates, like just what you just shared, right? Same job description, different companies, completely different expectations. This is why it's so important that when you are a candidate and you do get to the interview stage, you need to come with lots of really good questions. And I know we're going to chat about that a little bit later. We'll touch on that. But just, I think that's why, right? Because a job description does not tell the whole story. It's giving a framework around what the work looks like, but from different spaces, you may have done a role in this space and it looked this way. You cannot assume it's going to look exactly the same in this new organization. And so even though the job title and the job role might be the same, I think it's really important to have honest conversations in the interview process to be sure that you're doing your due diligence too as a candidate to mine out what exactly does this mean in this context? What am I actually signing up for? I see what it says on paper, but I think you want to be sure that you know exactly where that's going and that you're not getting caught up in this situation where it's a bad job description and where it's not actually clear or completely clear about what that means in this context. And I want to be careful to say too, like, I'm not saying the organization is intentionally lying. I'm saying it can be a bit of a blind spot. right? Where you just assume that because this is what this role means here, that that's what it means everywhere else. And so I think as an organization, the clearer you can be about what it means and what you're asking of the individual, the better applicants you're going to get. And the more likely you're going to be to find someone who has the skills, the passion, the desire, who feel called to that work in your space. So yeah, I think that's so important. I know in British Columbia, where I call home right now, I think my understanding is you legally have to post the salary range. And I was kind of shocked as I've started to become more active within the recruiting space that there are lots of places where that's not necessary. And I'm like, oh my word, I'm so used to that now, because that also, frankly, will do some of the work for you up front. What a terrible thing to walk someone through this entire process. And for you, even as an organization, to be like, oh my gosh, unicorns don't exist, but this person's pretty close. Like, wow. And then it comes to salary negotiation and you find out that you guys are this far away on salary. What a terrible waste of your time, a terrible waste of their time. Your heart's involved, their heart's involved. It doesn't help anybody. And so whether it's legally required or not, I absolutely agree. Let's put the salary range on there and then allow people who are selecting in to know exactly what they're signing up for, and that they feel comfortable with the fact that, okay, I have an idea of what range I'm going to be working in, and that works for me. And again, it works for them not necessarily because like, whoo, we're going to get rich, but it works for us because we have bills to pay and we have children and we have, we have rent, we have all these things. And I think it's just only fair for people to know what they're getting into as they start to apply.
Yeah, well said. Anything else on the organizational blind spots that you want to make sure we touch on before we dive into candidates?
I think the last thing I would say, and you hear it a lot, and it's one of our core values at Vocara Union, and that is just tell the truth. I just think honesty is king, right? It's not optional. And again, not accusing anyone of intentionally lying. But what I am saying is sometimes we have blind spots because we're used to living in the mess that we don't actually see it anymore. I don't know if I can just say for me with 3 kids, and I wish I could say that as teenagers, they are less messy than they were as youngsters, but it's not true, right? But it's always interesting to me how we kind of get used to it. Like, clean up your room, clean this up, whatever, blah, blah, blah. We're used to it. We kind of live in the mess that is the teenagers. And then some friends call up and they're like, hey, we're going to pop by for some snacks and some appies, maybe a glass of wine on a Friday night. We'll be there in about 15 minutes. And it's like, cool. Okay, great. We'd love to see you. And then hang up the phone and I turn around, I look at my house, and all of a sudden I see everything, right? I've been living in it. No big deal. I'm not thinking about it. But now that I know that other people are coming into this space, I immediately am aware of just like, holy crap, it's going to take me 10 minutes to clean this place up so that it looks decent. Similarly, I think as we work in the midst of organizations, the longer we're there, the easier it is for us to not have fresh eyes. We kind of miss some of these messy spaces. We get used to them and we kind of start ignoring them. So part of the process of being honest, I think, as you're getting ready to hire for a position, is to try to figure out a way to objectively step back from the org, and particularly step back from the area in the organization that you're going to be hiring into, and really do a bit of a 360 review. And sometimes it's helpful to have a third party come in with you and do a little bit of that review, do a little bit of digging with you to try to be sure that you have a real clear picture of, okay, this is actually the state of things. And sometimes that can be a little bit embarrassing, right? Where it's like, ooh, there's some stuff here that needs to get sorted out. Amazing. How great for you to kind of be able to see that with fresh eyes, have a more objective take on it, and actually bring that into the process so that the person who's coming in knows exactly what they're getting into. Because the right person will, again, we said it before, will not be deterred by that. They'll be excited about that. And they'll want to come in and they'll want to make a difference. So I just think it's so important that we must always, always, always let honesty drive.
Yeah, I know we touched on that a little bit on the last episode, but I did like what you said. When people come in, they're not going to be deterred necessarily by the challenges. The number of times where I've talked to people or I've started new roles and there's just a lot of ambiguity as to what I'm supposed to be doing. It's actually a gift, I think, if I can come in with, 3 or 4 problems to solve, because I know exactly how to hit the ground running and what to get my feet wet with. So for me personally, I happen to agree. And then anecdote, my messy house blind spot would be dog hair. It rolls around like tumbleweeds around here. So it takes a moment for me to go, oh, right, this is not normal for people that want clean feet and socks.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So people are coming over. I've got 10 minutes. I'm vacuuming. Guaranteed.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's dive into candidate blind spots. So, we chatted a little bit about what the organization can do. I think there's a lot that candidates come in with. This one, I think we touched on it earlier, and that is asking questions. I think you mentioned the importance of asking good questions. I
Yes.
think not asking any questions is often seen as a huge red flag to organizations. So if you're one of those people that doesn't come with some, pre-scripted questions, even if you go on YouTube and you type in, like job interview questions to ask employers, you'll get, 20 reels of the 5 best questions to ask
Yeah.
prospective employers.
Sure.
Yeah, any ones that you like getting if you were hiring?
I was just going to say, I've been shocked by the number of times, particularly in the last couple of years when I was hiring within the development department, that people would come in for an interview and you would come to the end and you'd be like, so yeah, what questions do you have for us? And I would say like a large percentage of people are like, no, I'm good. And I remember thinking, what do you mean? Like we've only had like half an hour together. It's a really short period of time for us to get to know you and you get to know us. And this is your opportunity to ask anything that you want. And so, yeah, I've always been, that does red flag for me because it makes me wonder about, how serious are they about this? Have they done any kind of research at all into this? I think for me, when someone is asking questions that are larger than the role itself, particularly in an organization, when they start asking questions about kind of mission, values, culture, impact in the community. When I worked in poverty reduction, often that can be polarizing. And so even if there's been a news article as of late that wasn't maybe as favorable towards our organization or towards the people that we serve, when they are willing to bring up like, so I read this the other day and I'm just curious about like, how are you guys navigating that and what does that mean and how does that impact the work or how does that impact me in the community as I'm out doing the work? Those sorts of questions to me tell me that someone is actually, they're thinking about who we are. They're thinking about what the work means, not only like in the org itself, but also out in the community. They're in tune with our values and our vision. They're in tune with in that case, they're in tune with the people that we served, our neighbors. And to me, those kinds of questions get me thinking about the fact that, oh, this is somebody who has actually given some real thought and that their heart seems to be aligned with the organization where we're going. The other kinds of questions I like is clarifying questions around the job description because we know that they are incomplete. We're trying to give a snapshot of the role. And so I love it when someone's like, can you tell me more about like what were the expectations around these major donor meetings that you've talked about? So can you tell me a little bit more about like how that works here? What's a donor meeting look like? What are your expectations for outcomes? Questions like how do you track that? Have any metrics that you'd be willing to share? So have an idea about like the level of work that I'm committing to or the frequency of work or like how intense it's going to be. Those sorts of questions tell me that they're actually really thinking about what it's going to look like for them to be in the role. And if someone's always trying to picture themselves in the role, then once again, that talk tells me that they are serious about the role. And to me, those are great questions to have. And honest questions about like, this is weird because, and again, I would almost love some feedback from you on this, Megan, because there's such different opinions about it. I've had people ask about kind of like expectations around hours, which again, in the interview, lots of people, I have some good friends who do hiring as well. And they're just like, oh, red flag. No, we don't like this person's just going to punch the clock and they're not interested and whatnot. I struggle with that a little bit because I also think maybe it's this. Maybe if someone does ask about hours and working hours and expectations, rather than going to red flag right away, I think let's just stay curious if you're in that interview space. And I would just say, stay curious and ask them to tell you more about that. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about why you're asking. Tell me what you're concerned about. Tell me what any experiences you've had that might be kind of driving that question, because often people come, well, not often, we always travel with baggage, right? It's just the way it is. And so before we label that person as like, oh, they're going to be punching the clock and they're not going to be willing to kind of put in the effort, I think let's try to stay curious, because oftentimes I found those questions really helpful because, again, they want to understand, what am I getting myself into here? Is the expectation and the norm in this space that we all work until 7 every night? Is the expectation that we're out multiple nights a week outside of work without flexing hours? Like, what are the expectations? And I think those sorts of clarifying questions really help you as an organization reflect on, oh, that's a blind spot. We haven't even really noticed that we've just slipped into this kind of culture now where people just work all the time and people don't go home and people are out late and people aren't seeing their families. And in some ways, we're encouraging that and holding that up as a badge of honor instead of maybe looking at it as like, oh, that's not as healthy as we'd like it to be. Or it's a person who's like, I'm totally down with putting in the hours that need to be done. Before I step into that space, I want to know what am I getting into? And again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a very valid question that often gets red flagged. And I think that's something we need to be thinking about as organizations as we're asking for open, honest questions and feedback.
Yeah, I think the single stupidest phrase to come out of the last 5 years is quiet quitting. I hate that terminology. Like, how many decades have we had roles where people punch in, punch out, and that's what's expected of them, and that's the job, right? But because we're in a certain industry or people can work remotely, all of a sudden that's a unrealistic and a red flag expectation. I think there's something to be said, because you're right, it's a very polarizing topic, right? I think if you have someone that is excited and nerdy about the thing that you're doing, we talked a little bit about Ben. I've always said, one of the things that separates Ben from other people is he's a fundraising nerd outside of work. Like, he'll send text messages. He's always looking at commercials. Everything is an opportunity. How can we bring that in? And that's part of his brain, and that's why he's been successful, right? And so, of course, you're going to
100%.
find those people. And when you do find those people and they're excited and they want to do it in their free time, and there isn't, an expectation of compensation for that, I think that's great. I think you still need to nurture that. You need to find ways to compensate that, whether that is, pro D time. Maybe that's where you get it back. Maybe every hour that you work, you get back in banked pro D time, right? So I know it can be a little bit of an HR nightmare to bank hours when people are on salary and the legality of having to pay that out. And I've experienced that and I've seen it. But I've also seen people that work overtime. They feel awful about reporting how many hours are going into projects, so they underreport. And then you're setting this benchmark up for the rest of the staff that are tracking their hours. That's completely unrealistic to meet. And then you're not getting a true idea of what the cost of projects are, or, the cost of employee labor is. And so then you're setting a really unrealistic expectation going down the line when you're hiring next. So I think it's going to be a balance. I don't think you're always going to get people that are excited. I think if you find that, that's great. Nurture it, grab onto it. But I think it's fine if people have boundaries, if they need, other ways to feel like their work is being appreciated or acknowledged or compensated. Try. Yeah, like I said, I think Pro D is an excellent one. Send them to conferences, give them extra vacation days. Like, I don't know exactly the legality for classifying vacation days, but I know I've had more luck requesting days off than necessarily banked hours. So there's a couple ways you can finagle it, but you're right. I think it takes a deeper conversation. I know I've been in interviews where I've said, I left because the last place burned me out. And it's true. And I didn't get that job. So, I mean, maybe don't use that one, but.
or maybe we should, because I think that's a great segue into like another blind spot, I think, for candidates. And that is telling the organization, telling the interviewers, or telling us as a recruiting company what you think we want to hear, right?
Yeah.
Not what you actually, right? Not what you actually think, or how you would actually approach a situation, or what you might need in this season. Like you said, I got burned out in the last space. You told the truth. You didn't get hired. Better for you not to get that role, because that would have probably been a toxic space for you, right? Because not because they were toxic, but their expectations was going to be that you would be working longer hours. Their approach to work was going to be different than what you actually needed at that point in time in your career where you were at. And I think a blind spot that lots of candidates fall into is, instead of actually answering the question, and sometimes you can almost see it happening. You can kind of see the wheels turning as you're asking a question, and they're now adjusting. You can see they're adjusting to be like, okay, now what do they want to hear right now? Do they want to hear that I have good boundaries, or do they want to hear that I'm a go-getter who's willing to work until the work's done? Like, they're trying to read it all out and figure out, and often too, I'll get like a clarifying, like, can I get you to clarify this, that, or the other thing? And then I know they're kind of trying to figure out the slant that I'm looking for, or maybe they truthfully just really want to know, like, what is it exactly you're asking, so I can actually give you the right answer. But lots of times the interview can kind of become a game of, all right, what do you want to hear? Let me see if I can figure out who your ideal candidate is. Let me see if I can give you all the answers that's going to put me at the top of the list. And honestly, I just think life is too short. Life is too short to be working in a space that you don't fit in and it isn't a good fit for you. And so, if that's your MO, I would suggest, let's put that aside, recognize that as a blind spot. And even though you might feel anxious in the moment, with some coaching, try to work yourself through the anxiety and actually just answer truthfully. Don't worry about what you think they want to hear, but instead answer the questions truthfully, bring the best of yourself to the table, bring strategic, true answers forward, and then see what happens. And if it's not the right fit for you, then it's not the right fit, because really we don't want to see people bouncing from role to role to role to role. We want people to be able to settle in and begin to actually make some real difference, particularly as we're working within that non-profit and not-for-profit and charity sector, right? So we don't want to see like a 12, 18-month churn over and over and over again, because people are like, okay, I said I'd love to do this, and I said this is what I wanted to do, and I said that this is how I would approach your thing. I said I would be okay with it, but actually I'm not. And now I hate this, and I'm tired, or I'm just unmotivated, or I'm bored. And so let's short circuit that at the very beginning. Address that blind spot of just telling people what you think they want to hear. And instead, bring the best of yourself, because I know when I'm interviewing people, I want to know who you are. I genuinely want to know. And frankly, as someone who's in recruitment, as a recruitment agency, if this isn't the place for you, but I get to know who you are and I see your skills and your gifts, there's probably going to be another opportunity that's going to be a better fit for you. And so I think that's a blind spot that lots of people fall into as candidates, and I think it's one to be avoided.
Yeah, you mentioned just at the end there, remembering people after they've worked with you, even if they don't get the role, right? And I think another blind spot that people have is just exiting gracefully, or following up, or, like not necessarily ghosting their recruiters and or prospective orgs. I know even if you get the job offer, to be honest, I've had people that were sitting on an offer for 2 weeks with no communication, and that can make people want to rethink an offer. That can make people want to rethink whether you're a good fit. And if you don't get that role, it's definitely a flag, right? So just open communication, I think, on that front. But then, yeah, I'm sure you've experienced a little bit of ghosting from a candidate. Any suggestions there?
I mean, I think the whole ghosting thing is really interesting. It is a two-way street. It really is. Because sometimes organizations, as they're in process and trying to figure out, like, okay, we have a few good candidates. Who's our optimal candidate? Who should we be going with? Sometimes that narrowing process, we'll get back to you within the next week or two, and then it turns into 3 weeks, or it turns into 4 weeks as they're kind of working through that process. And candidates are just sitting there waiting, and you said a week or two, and now it's week 3. And sometimes I think organizations just feel awkward because they're like, well, I don't really have any new news. I don't have anything to say. Perfect.
Say that.
If I'm there in the candidate's shoes, that's all I need to hear. Right? Just it can be a quick little connection, a quick little email to say, just want you to know the process is continuing. We're still interested. We're still working things through. We're going to need a few more days. We just want to keep you in the loop. Thank you for your patience. That will go miles when it comes to not only keeping candidates engaged, but even for those who don't receive the role, if the organization communicates well and doesn't ghost them in the process and doesn't ghost them afterwards, when it comes to if they would like feedback and they ask for feedback and then you just choose not to give it to them and move on because you've got your candidate now. That also, we've talked before, it hurts reputationally. It hurts the organization as well. So I think ghosting goes that way. But then the other side of it too is, when you reach out to a candidate that you're excited about and you're ready to kind of move towards the offer and you're looking for those references that you can check on, and then a day goes by and 2 days and 3 days and there's no references coming through, that is just not optimal for anyone. And it will cause the org that's actually really excited about you to start going like, well, wait a minute, why isn't he following through on this? Is he hiding something? Is she hiding something? Is she not dependable? Will she not get things through? But even too, like, okay, here's the offer. I had that happen just recently where we had a fantastic candidate that we were super excited about and put the offer out, and then like 5 days of silence. And on the third day, it was like an email like, hi, just checking back in, really excited, got the link there to kind of accept the offer, fill out this paperwork, get it back to us, and nothing. And then on the 6th day, we got an email that came in that was basically, thanks so much. I've just had a better offer come in over the last little bit and really appreciate it. Bye. And again, people have to take the time they need to sort through those offers as well. But some communication along the way, I think it's just key. And lots of times we feel anxious about it too as candidates. When you're interviewing for a job, you might feel anxious about, like, I don't want to say the right thing, wrong thing. I don't want to, maybe I'm considering 2 offers and I really don't want to tip their hand because what if that is the better one or whatnot? And again, I think just simple communication. Thank you so much for the offer. I'm just reading it over carefully. I'm giving it some thought. I'm going to need a couple more days. I'll get back to you on this date. Thank you very much. Right? Just be honest about your process too. And if that is enough to trigger org to be like, well, we're not ready to wait 2 days, well, then maybe they're actually not the right space for you, and maybe you're not the right person for them. So I know it sounds like it's a little bit scary, but I just think we have to kind of own that communication on both sides. And it's a blind spot, I think, to think that we can just stop communicating either as an org or as a candidate and that things are going to be okay. Because that silence is deafening.
Yeah, I remember early on I was warned getting into nonprofits that it's a very small community, and it's true. You network, like check out LinkedIn. You're like 1 degree of separation away from everybody. Everybody that's anybody in the nonprofit industry. So just really taking the time to make sure that you're communicating. It's big on your reputation. And I have had people tell me numerous times that they talked about me at a conference with old employers, sometimes ones that I didn't even, leave on the best terms with. But so far, I haven't heard any trash talking, so that's great. They signed an NDA, or what is that called? It's not an NDA, but it's like, I promise not to trash talk you if you promise not to trash talk me. So,
Oh,
I mean,
I've never signed one of
you haven't
those.
seen one of those?
No.
I have seen one of those, yeah. So it's at least they're living up to their end of it for sure. I
Yeah, sure.
anonymize anything bad I have to say, but
That's
you
right.
know,
It's all
it's
just general hypothetical situations.
yeah, it's a small community for sure. And then, I found a study recently, or it wasn't that recently, it was a year or two ago, but it was around wait room times at airports, or I guess
Mm,
waiting times at airports.
waiting.
And
Yep.
people have a way longer tolerance for waiting if they have some idea of how long the wait's going to be. So, I
Yep.
mean, even if you say, like, we're going to be delayed by an hour, and then that turns into 2 hours, and then that turns into 4 hours, there's more of a tolerance and an acceptance there than if you're just sitting there waiting for 45 minutes even. So, I mean, just checking in psychologically, you have to remember that applicants are maybe sitting without any income for this time. So
Oh,
that's a
100%.
huge anxiety that's on their shoulders. And then, similarly, the organizations, they might have someone out of that role for God knows how long. They might be coming into busy season. So just, yeah, be kind to one another,
Be
communicate.
I love that. I love that. See communication as an act of kindness. You're being kind to yourself and to the org by communicating well, and you're also being kind to the individual. And kindness it's a great commodity in this world, right? If you as an
Mhm.
organization are known for being kind and being kind in the way that you work with potential candidates as well as your staff, man, as you say, especially as a not-for-profit in the very small world that is, that will go a long way when it comes to recruiting new talent who are going to want to come and be a part of an organization that knows how to treat people well.
Absolutely. All right. What else do we have here?
We've talked about, I guess, org blind spots, candidate blind
Yep.
spots, and so this whole blind spot thing, it seems like we all have lots of them. And so, what do you do about it? I guess is what we could talk about next.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. So, I mean, I think the first thing is identifying your blind spots. Do you have any tips for figuring out what those are? How would I know if I have blind spots, Troy?
Well, Megan, let me tell you what all your blind spots are. No, it's just kidding. I'm
But
kidding, but
really,
like,
though, I think that's a good
no,
one too. You have to have people
no.
you can talk to.
I think that it's almost impossible. Very few people are able to identify their blind spots just simply on their own, because they're called blind spots for a reason. Each of us have our own kind of wirings and psyches and experiences that have created a lot of these blind spots for us. And so for us, they're there in our lives, and we don't, or in the way that we work and in our relationships, and we just don't see them. We just don't, which is why I call them blind spots. So I made up a word with my wife, and she is my blind spot spotter, right?
Hmm.
There's no one in the world I trust more than my wife, Teresa, because I know that she loves me fiercely and she is for me, but she loves me enough that when there is a blind spot that she knows is getting in the way of my personal growth or my leadership development or in the way of the company, she will call that out. She is my blind spot spotter. And I think I can also think about I have a spiritual director who I meet with regularly. Similarly, as we process together what's going on in my life, things that I'm facing, things I might be feeling, things that I'm struggling with, she is a blind spot spotter. She is fantastic at being able to go like, tell me more about that. Do you think that this might be about that? And next thing you know, I'm like, oh, there's another kind of blind spot that I wasn't necessarily aware of, but now that I see it, it's not always comfortable, but now I have the opportunity to recognize it, address it, figure out strategies and tactics for navigating around it so that I can then continue to move forward safely, knowing that that blind spot's there and that now I can actually navigate around it or journey along with it and not end up kind of crashing along on the way. So I would suggest that one of the key things that each and every one of us needs, at whoever you are, wherever you are, but particularly I think if you're a leader or you're in that nonprofit space as a leader who's leading a not-for-profit, I just think that we all need people in our lives and people on our teams who are for us, who we can trust, and who are just willing to tell us the truth, even if it stings a little. And this can't be everybody, but we all need to find somebody who knows our work and knows our personality and knows our approach, who we can actually have really honest conversations with. And sometimes it's just about inviting people in. If you know someone, you trust them, invite them in to be a blind spot spotter. Maybe it's a coach that you hire who comes alongside. Maybe it's your therapist. Maybe it's your partner. Maybe it's a good friend. But we all need blind spot spotters in our lives, I think, to call those spaces out, because by nature, we don't see them, right? That's why they're called blind spots.
So if you don't have that person in your life that you can maybe lean on, do you think there's a place for, there's these like self-assessment personalities, value-based sort of quizzes? I know many years ago when I started at an organization, they had us take the Berkman, and it sort of outlines where you might struggle. And it said that I might struggle accepting criticism. And very on the nose, my response was, I'm going to be so upfront about everything I do wrong forever because I can take criticism. Great. And so my motto was like, I fall on the sword for this. This is my fault. Which accountability is not quite the same as taking criticism. I learned later on, almost like taking accountability to a fault for things that maybe were other people's faults, but that's okay.
Oh, my word. Yes.
All that to say, it's been a journey for me for sure. I do think, like, realistically, criticism can be a little bit challenging. And sometimes I've had to teach myself to go back. If I don't necessarily take it that well in the moment, I really make sure that I take time to reflect on it, sort of take that journey and do some introspection. And then also go back to the person that gave me that feedback and tell them that I've done that. I think that's important too, because if you don't have the best response in the moment, can really scare people off from giving you that feedback later. And you do need it, right? So, I mean, ideally taking it with grace in the moment, but if you struggle with that a little bit, like I sometimes do, making sure that you go back and reaffirm that. But yeah, in your experience, what do you think? You guys do the Berkman for, is it the first 40 that you do that for?
Yeah, actually within if Bakari Union is hired to do a search, when we come down to kind of like the final 3 to 5 candidates, we'll actually offer the Berkman at the beginning, like in the search process, so that we help the individuals get to know themselves better and identify maybe some blind spots that they don't know about, even as they're coming into the interview process. But also, we can then share that Berkman information with the organization who's getting ready to interview the top 2 or 3 people to hire. And that also gives them insight into who are these people, how do they work, what are their strengths, where do they go under stress. So the Berkman is a great, great tool for you to try to understand exactly how you work, where do you, like, what feeds you and where do you go when you're healthy, but also where do you go when you're stressed, what behaviors do you exhibit. It helps you get to know yourself a little bit more. And so you can start to identify, I'm not okay, there's something going on here. But I think if the Berkman is used within the context of your teams too, then other people on the team recognize the behavior and they're able to kind of put up a red flag and say, hey, I don't think everything's okay. I'm not sure what it is. Like, can we talk about it? Let's try to figure that out together. But you have to have someone that you can trust, right? But I love, if I can go back to your example, I love the fact that, like, for you, kind of taking criticism was a bit of a blind spot. Like, you maybe didn't recognize how it made you react or how you reacted to that criticism. And yet, as you learned about it, even as you talked about it, it's not like the blind spot goes away, right? Like, you don't have to love receiving feedback or critical feedback, constructive criticism, we'll call it. You don't have to love that, but now you know your tendency to respond to it. And so you've learned to kind of take it away, process it, walk it through, and go back to that person to let them know that you did, and to have follow-up conversations if you need to, just in case in the moment, as you're trying to navigate that, this was telling a different story than maybe what was going on internally. That helps that relationship stay strong. And so you've recognized the blind spot, and you've developed strategies and tricks for how you're going to navigate that blind spot so that you can be part of a productive team and you can receive the feedback that we all know is necessary in order to grow. Because as my dad used to tell me when I was a teenager, and I didn't like it, I didn't like feedback. I did not like my dad telling me what to do, because I was 16 and I knew everything. And how dare he speak to me like this? And my dad always used to tell me that feedback is the breakfast of champions. And that will be in our merch shop one day. We'll have that on a t-shirt. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. And the little tagline we could put under it is, if you choose to digest it, right? Like, you have to be able to take it on board. But feedback is it's critical. And I think many of us struggle with feedback. And I think it's a blind spot for lots of people where they think they're okay with it. and they think they respond well to it. But more and more, I think in our culture where everything is celebrated and rarely are we told that something that we're doing is not perfect, feedback becomes harder and harder to take. And I think it becomes a big blind spot for folks. So it is something to work on. We should all have our feedback is the breakfast of champions t-shirt. We should all wear it to work. We should look at it in the mirror. It should remind us every day that it might be a blind spot for us and it's an area for growth. But I just think when it comes to kind of blind spots, we have to have a blind spot spotter. But it's one thing to have somebody we can trust who can talk to us about what they see. Like, I think this might be a blind spot for you. It's another thing for us to be able to kind of take that on board. But then the real work comes, as you did, to sit down and be like, okay, I think that is a blind spot for me. So how do I deal with that? Like, what do I need to put into place? And then sometimes that's about, I don't know how to navigate this on my own. I didn't even know I had it, and now I see it and I'm not sure how to fix it. So like, let me find a coach, let me find a therapist, let me find a course, let me find something online, let me read a book. Like it then takes investment on your part to actually then begin to build strategies around that so that you can overcome it. It's not going to probably go away. Just like in my Subaru, the blind spot is there. It will be there forever. My children have stopped running into things, though, now that they actually know that there is a blind spot there. And so it's the same for us, I think, when it comes to our vocations, is discovering the blind spot is one thing. Receiving the feedback that you have a blind spot in that area, that can be challenging. But then the next step is also on us to do the hard work of then figuring out, okay, what do we need to do to kind of navigate that well? I think a blind spot for me that I've actually just discovered, it's hilarious we're talking about this because I really just discovered it this week. And that is that I was raised in a reactive environment. And so my approach to life, but particularly my approach to managing my schedule as a new entrepreneur who's working for myself, my schedule has been reactive instead of proactive. I've been raised to believe that everybody else's needs supersede my own, which means I have to say yes to everybody. When anybody needs something, anybody wants something, anybody has a question, I will drop everything in that moment to make sure that that person's okay. And what that's done over the years is it's caused me to run like I'm on a hamster wheel 24/7. It disrupts my focus. It takes me away from priority tasks and gets me running down paths chasing just little just little distractions, little jobs, little tasks that you can kind of check off and maybe feel good about. But at the end of the day, they don't actually lead you to the most productive kind of day that you want to have. And someone pointed this out to me on Monday, and it was hard. It was hard for me to hear it because it also made me address like, oh yeah, there's some stuff here from like my upbringing and from my childhood that's actually wired me to kind of be this way. And I thought everyone approached it this way, and I thought this was the right way to approach it. And now I'm starting to realize that actually, wow, I get to actually make different choices. I get to say when I'm available and when I'm not. I actually get to bring priority and focus to the things that are most important for the organization, for my own health, for my family, and then I get to dictate when other people get access to me for meetings and whatever else they might need. It's been a total eye-opener for me. I have felt frustrated by that for years, and a half an hour with somebody who I actually don't know that well, and yet she was very insightful and asked really good questions, and all of this, the lights just kind of came on. And now I've had to walk away from it, and through some, quite frankly, some anxiety as I've been like, oh my word, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. I've had to start actually asking somebody else to come alongside and say, okay, I need to learn, right? I know this blind spot's here. I don't want to keep merging into traffic and crashing. I want to be able to journey forward on my leadership journey, and I want to have a more successful season ahead of me. So I'm going to need some help to address this so that I just don't fall back into old habits. And so it's one thing to identify it, and we have to be humble enough, and we have to trust someone enough to do that. It's another thing then to take the steps necessary to start navigating that blind spot well.
Well said. Yeah. Sometimes it's the little things, or even things you've heard 1,000 times, but then you just need to be in the right space for it to click, right? I've definitely
100%.
had some of those moments. So many cliches become more and more true as I'm in my 30s. All the things I used to shake my head at in my teens.
You ancient of days in your 30s. That's hilarious.
Sure. Was there anything
ma'am.
that you wanted to shamelessly plug that might assist organizations or individuals with finding their blind spots with regards to Vocara Union offerings? I know we talked a little bit about the first 40. Do you want to give
Sure.
us the the high level of what that is? And what about there's these scouting reports I keep hearing about? Would that also help with blind spot recognition?
Percent. So our first 40 was developed to help provide onboarding support and services for new hires, particularly executives in the not-for-profit space, just recognizing that often a blind spot for not-for-profits is that their onboarding practices are often not strong. And I think that's because the work that they are doing is very, very important, and they are focused on the mission, and there's just always more to do. And therefore, the focus on good SOPs and good processes for onboarding someone when they come into the organization are often not there. The energy is chosen to be given to the people that they serve, which is beautiful and great, and it's why they exist. But often then people are coming on, don't have the support they need. And so what we'll do is, as Vocara Union, is we will come in and we'll provide onboarding services for the first 40 days, 40 being somewhat metaphorical. So, for the first kind of 4 to 6 weeks, we'll meet weekly with the individual who is starting a new role. We'll help plan out that onboarding journey, be sure that they have everything they need. We'll work through friction points. We'll walk with them to identify kind of the big rocks that they need to address at first and help them develop their 90-day plan so that they can kind of get off to a good start. And we can also work as like that in-between person between them and the board or their director to be sure that everyone's living up to their promises and everyone's getting what they need in order to be successful going forward. And certainly in those conversations and in those relationships, we do have the opportunity to kind of point out blind spots that we might encounter along the way to try to help them see what those might be at the very beginning of their journey so that they can grow into the role and have a long-term success and impact. And then the other thing you talked about was scouting reports. So we also develop a tool where we can come into an organization and we can do a scouting report of your team. It is a very relational approach with one-on-one meetings with your team members to just do a bit of a deep dive to discover like who they are, how are they fitting, do they feel valued, what would help them feel more valued, how are they fitting culturally, what are their aspirations, what do they need to be there long-term, and who do they hope to become along the way. And what that will often do is help unearth some blind spots for organizations, because I've talked to a number of organizations about the potential of doing the scouting report, and a number of them have said, well, maybe you could kind of come in and do that, but I don't know. We know our people. We know our culture. We know how people are feeling. We don't know there's going to be a lot of value there. And I'm always like, well, if you're so confident, then what's the hurt, right? Well, why don't we see if there's anything more to unearth? And the truth of the matter is, one org in particular that I have had a chance to do a little bit of work with, it became pretty clear after a couple of conversations that they thought that their staff was like dialed into the mission, the vision, the values, and that they felt very valued and seen. And it became clear within a couple of conversations that the staff was feeling very unseen, had lots of questions about kind of like, I'm not exactly sure that I'm aligned with this anymore because it's getting kind of murky and mucky, and I think we need some clarity along the way. And so those kinds of conversations with your staff, we can bring that report back to the leadership, to the board, to the ED, and help kind of bring some clarity to like, actually, we think there might be a couple of blind spots here that if you can address those, it's not only going to bring clarity to your team, but it's going to actually build stronger relationships, and it's going to help bring resiliency. So those are a couple of ways that we can be involved as well. Also, we provide ongoing coaching for people we've hired, and really the whole point of that is just to walk through people over the first 2 years of their journey with quarterly check-ins, just to help people be sure that they're navigating those challenges along the way well, and that as blind spots pop up, they get identified, but then also we work to strategically help them figure out how they're going to address them so that they can move forward and be the best of themselves for these organizations that really are looking to change the world.
Before we wrap up, usually we would be looking at our Vocare voicemails. I don't think we have anything this week. Do you? No.
I have not received a voicemail, so we'll have to hold that for next time.
If you have any questions that you think the master here, Troy, could answer, or perhaps I might be of service for, you can follow us at Vocara Union on Instagram and drop us a line there, or on LinkedIn, shoot us a message, an in-mail, whatever we're calling it on all these platforms. And I don't know if we've got Facebook up yet, but we will soon. Maybe in lieu of that, Troy, before you sign off, you had a PSA about real estate agents, I think.
Oh, yes. This is me apologizing to all of my wonderful realtor friends. And in our first episode, I made the comparison between how I think some of our recruitment agencies that are not following best practices remind me of realtors. And after I heard that, I was like, oh dear, no, no, no. That's just me riffing off the cuff. And I just want to say to all my realtor friends out there, many of whom are amazing realtors who help people find their homes, I did not mean all realtors. Really, the context for that was like, if you can imagine the worst case realtor in the world, and we've met a few of those, let's be honest, they are out there, but there are many realtors out there who do great work, and we are thankful for them. And I meant in no way to disparage all realtors with my comment, but certainly what I wanted to say contextually was imagine the worst case scenario of a realtor, the worst realtor ever, who does not care, who's just about the profit. That's how we see some recruitment agencies acting as well. There are lots of great recruitment agencies out there doing the work too, but when we see the worst of the worst, it does look like that.
Thanks, Troy. Yeah, shout out Michelle, shout out Catherine. If you need good real estate agents here in Calgary, I'll hook you up. I know Troy has a couple he's really fond of out in the Kelowna
I'll give
area.
a shout out to Joanna and to Joel. Man, I would happily connect you with Joanna or Joel. They are incredible people who do incredible works. Absolutely. Megan, this has been great. Thank you for joining me today on Vocation Mode episode 2.
Bye-bye.